Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We have a few people still joining, but we're at about 100 attendees already online to be part of this discussion today. A very warm welcome to all of you for joining the first session of the Advancing Impact Reporting webinar series. And this is a collaborative co-hosted by Impact Frontiers and AVPA. And in this particular session, we're going to be joined by two organizations who are working in this space in Africa, and we'll be introducing them to you shortly. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping rules. Please remain on mute during the session and feel free to use the chat interface for any questions. This session is being recorded so that those who need to revisit the content later can be able to do so. We will be running some interactive polls in the course of the session, so feel free to, input because your feedback is very valuable to us. And in the event you are inspired to share some of what you've learned or heard during the course of this, please feel free to also use the hashtag impact reporting and hashtag AVPA as you do that on your socials. And we're very excited to be able to kick this important journey with you. And please share your information in the chat. I can already see a couple of folks who have done that and are introducing themselves. And so we're starting. Please put in your name, where you're coming from. It's always a delight to see how broad this network is growing and the different kinds of organizations that are part of these conversations. So please use the chat. And this series is really about supporting the adoption of the impact performance reporting norms. And Matt, who you can see on your screen, is with Impact Frontiers and will be taking us through a little bit of an introduction for some of those who may be hearing about this for the first time. But essentially, it's a framework developed to standardize and strengthen how organizations communicate their social and environmental performance, right? So according to GIN, in 2023, in their annual Impact Investor Survey, only 36% of global impact investors are reporting consistently using standardized metrics. However, in Africa, it's only at 18% who have embedded consistent performance reporting frameworks. And basically that shows that there is a gap and there is an opportunity for us to learn and to try and adopt not the same, but certainly similar approaches to be able to report more on the amazing work all the organizations that you're representing do. And that's why this webinar series is more than just a technical training. It's really a space for learning, for peer exchange, and for contextualizing the norms in a way that reflects our ecosystems from Nairobi to Lagos, Joburg to Dakar. And throughout the series session that we're having, we will be combining core content presentations to demystify key reporting principles, and we will also be showcasing real-world case study, what good impact reporting looks like in action. So in today's session, presenting impact performance, we are going to be exploring how to move beyond fragmented data and generic dashboards to clear, credible, and audience-relevant communication of impact. We also encourage you to take part more actively by submitting your own case study for one of our upcoming sessions. It's a chance to showcase your work, share your learning journey, and strengthen the community of practice across the continent. On the screen, we have the program for today. I will just be giving this sort of overview and setting the stage for this conversation. So you'll not be hearing my voice for a couple of more minutes. I will be handing over to Matt, who is going to be doing our keynote presentation. Then over to David, who is going to be presenting our case study 1. And Abdullahi, who's going to be then doing our case study 2. And I will let them introduce themselves and their organizations when they come up to speak. That'll be followed by a Q&A session That'll be led by Sam, who's on your screen as well. He's our program manager at ABPA, and then we will close thereafter. So thank you very much and enjoy the session. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you so much, Nasri, and what a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining today. As I start talking, I believe we're going to engage you all and start to listen to some of your perspectives by answering the question that you see on screen. So if colleagues will be able to launch the poll now, tell us what you feel about impact reporting. Is it essential? Is it a burden? You have some mixed feelings about impact reporting, or you're not sure yet, and that's why you joined today. You need to learn more about it. Okay. And I think hopefully we're ready to see the results in a second. If colleagues can share those. Wonderful. Okay, so we have some very positive feelings about impact reporting, with 76% saying it's essential. No one so far saying it's a burden. We've got an unfair minority there, around 15% with mixed feelings, and about 10% or so ready and willing to learn more. Well, that's a great starting point. So let us move to the next slide. And I will take the next 15 minutes or so to provide a bit of framing for the conversation around the who, the why, and the what of impact reporting. Because as we all know, impact reporting is widely used as a way for organizations to disclose their results, to reflect both on past successes and challenges, as well as to look ahead. And typically, those reports have a two-way relationship. So they're shared with those providing resources to organizations, such as funders or investors, as a way to ensure accountability. And of course, as you see on the screen on the left-hand side, there's those writing the reports themselves, and they may have other important reasons beyond accountability, including learning, peer sharing, or more broadly informing the public about their work. So think of that two-side relationship in an impact report, the writers and the readers. So the key question that I'd like you to think about is, what should a report contain to be both useful for those readers, but also efficient for those writing the reports? And actually, surprisingly, or perhaps somewhat surprisingly to date, there's been relatively little consensus about what that report should contain. There are, of course, various reporting frameworks and disclosures and metric sets in use, but particularly for investors, there's been no shared guidance on what to include on an impact report. And this is where our work at Impact Frontiers came in. So a couple of years ago, we kickstarted a process to listen to impact investors and co-develop a shared approach to the content, structure, and format of impact reports. The result was what you can see in the center of your screen: the impact performance reporting norms. These are open access, non-proprietary criteria that can be used to assess, evaluate, or even verify the quality of impact reports. The reporting norms are primarily designed for the investment community, and particularly for impact funds reporting on their performance to capital providers. However, recognizing we have a broad participation in the room from both investment community and beyond, the reporting norms can actually serve as inspiration and guidance for any organization reporting on its impact, from social enterprises to non-profits and beyond. So if we move to the next slide, we can see some of what the reporting norms contain. So the reporting norms outline the basic recipe for an impact report. They suggest 6 sections that provide this consistent structure to help both the writer and the reader of the report, remember that two-way relationship, focus on what really matters. And let me just walk you briefly through these 6 sections. So first is entity overview and impact thesis. So this answers the question, who are you and what are you trying to achieve as an organization? So it really sets the stage by describing the organization's purpose and the intended positive impact. We then move on to impact management processes. So this is section 2. This explains how the organization is actually measuring and managing its impact. Section 3 is really the meat and the body of the reporting norms. So this is what actually happened. It's where the outcomes and results are presented, supported by data and evidence. And this is what we're going to double click on in a second. We then have the remaining sections being the governance of impact, or how impact is governed across the organization, including roles, responsibilities. We have a suggested section on case studies that really help bring some of the impact performance data to life. And then there's a final optional section on independent review. So if there has been a third party involved in that two-way relationship to perhaps audit, assure, or verify, this is the place to include it. So if we move to the next slide, we can see, sorry, the previous slide. Thank you. Here we can see a little bit more of a sneak peek into what each of those sections of the reporting norms contain. So it includes specific recommendations on what to include on a comply or explain basis. So that means that report preparers, those writing the reports, should either include the suggested content or explain why it's not relevant or feasible for them in their context. And so on screen, you can see an extract from section 3.2 of the reporting norms. Here, and I'll briefly summarize, the recommendation when you're disclosing impact performance is to go beyond just activities and outputs and include, as far as possible, towards outcomes and impacts on people and planet, focusing not just on the positive results, but any negative impacts and what you've learned from those. How the organization has contributed to these outcomes, the results relative to targets, to assess progress relative to thresholds, for example, what constitutes a positive outcome from affected stakeholders, and so on. This is about as far as the norms go in standardization. So lots of the more granular details, like specific metrics or data or formats, are actually left to the discretion of those writing reports, allowing flexibility for different contexts and sectors. So if we move to the next slide, recognizing, however, that if an organization was to cover off every single point in the impact performance reporting norms for every single project, investment activity it does, we're going to get some very long impact reports. Like the poor person on screen, those readers would be left sifting through very, very long documents that, let's be honest, they're not going to have time to engage with. So the point of the reporting norms is actually quite the opposite, to reduce the reporting burden while increasing that usefulness of reports for decision makers. So the key thing here is that when you're writing reports, there's judgment needed to be exercised in deciding what and how much information to include. So if the content of the reporting norms doesn't standardize everything, I think the key question is how can those writing reports decide what to leave in and what to leave out of their reports? Well, on the next slide, we'll see where the characteristics of useful information come in. And these are a set of principles that pick up where the standardization of content leaves off. And they are designed to help guide report preparers exercise that judgment call about what to put in and what to leave out. For those of you who are familiar with financial reporting, these principles might sound and look familiar because they're actually drawn from the same conceptual foundations and frameworks as financial reporting. Here and in the reporting norms, we've just interpreted them in the context of impact. I'm going to take just a second to walk through them, particularly focusing on the first two, what are known as fundamental characteristics of useful information, that are relevance and faithful representation. So the first is relevance. relevance is about information being relevant if it helps users to make decisions. So think of everything that I just explained to you in terms of those 6 sections and the content of the reporting norms being the types of information that are relevant to include in an impact report. And just as a side note, we went through a long process of consultation, spoke to over 300 organizations across every continent in the globe to come up with that consensus around what that content of relevant information could be. The second fundamental characteristic is faithful representation. So this means in presenting your impact data and performance, it needs to be complete, neutral, and accurate. Now, those are 3 quite loaded words, so let's unpack those 3 in turn. Complete essentially means including all impacts that are known or could be reasonably expected to known. But it really important to say it doesn't mean exhaustive. It is not possible to capture and communicate every single impact. And particularly judgment is needed to balance the cost and effort of collecting that data against the significance of impacts and the needs of the audience, i.e. the readers. So that's complete. Neutral means presenting information without bias, manipulation, or distortion, and really trying to avoid kind of conscious or unconscious bias. Again, the aim here is not to present everything kind of in a positive light or a negative light, but truthfully. The third, accurate. Accurate doesn't mean perfectly precise, because again, we're dealing in some of the messy world of social and environmental change, but actually it means having good enough controls in place to avoid errors and clearly identifying limitations, estimates, and any uncertainties in the data. So those 2, relevance and faithful representation, are the core qualities that make information in impact reports trustworthy and decision useful. There are 4 other enhancing characteristics that we'll get to in the later webinars in this series, but we're not going to go into these today. We'll explore them more in future sessions. Well, let me bring these two to life now with a couple of examples, and then I'll close out. Because they can seem quite theoretical, these characteristics of useful information, but actually they are really useful in helping those writing reports decide what to present in terms of their impact reports and how to present it. So the first example I'll give you comes from the Sustainable Change Fund. Now, this is a real impact fund, but we've changed its name to preserve anonymity. The Sustainable Change Fund has a mission to reduce inequalities by investing in companies with fair employment and pay practices. And you'll see data from their last report on screen. They share the following data. So the average CEO to worker pay ratio across all the companies they invest in is 70 to 1. So that essentially means that the CEO earns 70 times the average wage of the regular worker. They're comparing that to an industry average of 100. So they're saying all other companies have a much bigger CEO to worker pay ratio. The companies they invest in have a lower CEO to worker pay ratio. So in other words, a lower ratio indicates a smaller pay gap. So I'd love to get your thoughts, just very quick snap poll on this. Would you see this impact fund then as having a positive impact performance? Would that ratio of 70 indicate, as it's lower than an industry benchmark, positive performance? If you can just pop yes or no into the chat box, that would be super helpful. And of course, any thoughts or comments you have as to the reasons why or why not, please do put them into the chat function. Give everyone a second to vote. Okay. Are we ready to see the results? There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see this as well as I can, but we have a roughly even split. About half yes and about half no. I think this is a super interesting example because on the face of it, yes, it does look pretty positive, right? The companies that this investor is working with are in essence have more equal pay practices than other companies. However, if we move to the next slide, there is an important piece of missing context. And that is that research published by the United Nations recommends that the CEO to worker pay gap should not exceed 30 to 1. In other words, the UN considers that any ratio above 30 to 1 is contributing to inequality, not reducing it. So while the Sustainable Change Fund has got this nice ratio of 71, which is definitely better than the industry average of 100 to 1, it's still more than double the recommended threshold for what a positive outcome would look like. So that means better than peers, but still contributing to a negative impact. So if you're an investor considering investing in this fund, you might want to ask, is the fund committed to reducing this ratio further? For example, do they want to move towards that 30 to 1 threshold over time? Or is it simply positioning itself as less bad than others without a clear target or long-term improvement plan? So it shows, I think here, I talked earlier about contextualizing impact data and about the importance of what the norms suggest is that putting impact information against things like targets and thresholds. Because without a threshold, the information I showed on the previous slide is incomplete. We don't actually know whether the result is positive or negative for people and planet. And that actually risks misrepresentation, because as we saw from the audience poll just now, about half of people thought it wasn't positive impact performance, half the people thought it was positive impact performance. So a reader could actually misinterpret this as positive impact performance when in fact the fund is still contributing to negative outcomes and ultimately making all this impact data less useful to decision making. So let's briefly move to the next real world example now. And this comes from another impact fund called the Education Impact Fund. And that invests in companies that are aiming to improve access to education and skills development. And again, on screen, you can see an extract from their latest impact report, where they state, last year, they reached over 1 million individuals. Now, that sounds a pretty impressive number, right? And in fact, they do some really good things. They define very clearly in their impact report what this word reach means. And they define reach as not just about someone accessing a product or service, but that person actually benefiting from it in a way that helps them improve their skills. And not only do they provide the definition of reach, but they provide the breakdown in the pie chart on the right, which is showing how this 1 million figure was calculated. Essentially, that about half of that figure, so 500,000 people were reached through company A. Again, we've anonymized the company names here. 250,000 through company B and another 250,000 through company C. So what do you think? If you glance at this, if you saw this in an impact report, do you think this represents a faithful depiction of impact performance? Again, if you can just give me a quick yes or no, that'll be super. Okay, hopefully you've all had a chance to answer now, and so we can launch the results. And well, some of you have probably cottoned on that I am not going to be sharing good reporting practices all the time. So the number of people saying no has slightly shifted, but again, a little bit split evenly down the middle between 45% think it does and 55% think that it doesn't. Well, here's something that the report doesn't say up front. If we move to the next slide, we can see that oh, sorry, one slide previous. There we go. Perfect. So what the report doesn't say and doesn't disclose to the readers is that company A, so you remember company A was the one that's kind of accounting for half of the figures in that 1 million, so 500,000 people reach, actually uses modeled data. That's because the company can't track the number of unique users on its online training platform, so it has to estimate the number of users using proxies like logins and downloads. However, in contrast, companies B and C are able to track discrete verified users. Now, let's be clear, there's nothing wrong with using modeled data, and in fact, sometimes it's the only practical or feasible option. However, the quality of data is clearly very different across these three companies. Two are able to directly measure, the other one is able to only infer. And so remember what we said earlier, or what I said about faithful representation? It means presenting data with transparency about limitations, about clearly identifying estimates, approximations, and uncertainty. So to stay true and think about how they could faithfully represent the data, the Education Impact Fund could have perhaps flagged that half of this total of 1 million is based on a modeled estimate. They could have included a footnote explaining how that 500,000 figure was derived. Or they could have even, instead of presenting one big figure like 1 million, split it into two figures, maybe 500,000 that they could confidently track as individuals reached and 500,000 estimated to have been reached based on modeled data. In other words, there's different options for them to improve the accuracy and trustworthiness of the report without kind of setting and discarding that useful information aside. And I'll say one final thing on this example, which is a closer look at the wording. On the previous slide, if you remember, we had the report saying the Education Impact Fund reached 1 million individuals. Well, the question is, did the fund itself reach them? Well, no, actually, it's the companies that the fund invested in reached them. And those companies likely have multiple investors. So more accurate language could have been something like companies financed by the Education Impact Fund collectively reached an estimated 1 million individuals during the reporting period. It sounds like a small change, but it is actually potentially quite a significant change because it avoids overclaiming and makes the report both more neutral and more accurate. So let me close out on the final slide with a few tips. Tips on presenting impact performance. So I said at the beginning that two-way relationship between writers and readers. It's surprisingly easy to not be in the mind of the person who's reading the impact report, but actually looking at how you're presenting impact performance information, trying to think about how that might be interpreted by a reader is very helpful. So when preparing an impact report, you can ask yourself, will this information be useful to the reader? And is it a complete, neutral, and accurate depiction of performance? And in doing that, you can try and avoid these three common pitfalls, all of which I mentioned in the examples just now. Try and avoid floating metrics. So that's kind of data without context. Things like baselines, targets, thresholds, or time trends makes information much easier to interpret. So help readers understand, is this good? Is this improving? Is this enough? The second thing to avoid is flat data. That is recognizing that not all data is equal. So make it clear when a number is an estimate, or it's modeled, or it's based on proxies, or you're uncertain about it, because that shows readers that you know and helps them understand data quality. And the last is, as far as possible, avoid far-fetched claims. So be as precise as possible in the language used, in how you're describing your role and the size of the impact. Like in the previous case, avoid suggesting your fund caused the entire impact, especially when many other investors or actors are involved. So again, this could be as simple as tweaks around language. Instead of we reached, it could be something like companies we financed or projects we worked with. So at that, let me pause and hand back over to the AVPA team.
Thank you, Matt. We saw lots of emojis floating as you were talking, especially around that last slide. So, you know, what it is, you know, thinking about who is going to read this report. How clear are you about your organizational role in the final numbers. And these are really like very practical exemplifications that Matt is offering us. So and I think also just it's sometimes unintentional, right? That you may oversell your role in this space and the impact that you're giving. So this really lend really good like questions to ask yourself, right? As you're formulating your impact metrics, and on what basis are you doing that? So thank you so much, Matt. And I think we can move into the next one, the next poll. So you can launch that, please. So this one is around what is your biggest challenge in impact reporting? So based on what Matt just shared, just going to give you a couple more seconds because there's a short answer response there. So I'm also interested to see the ones that went sort of on Matt's list. I think we can launch the results now. Right. And so you can see flat data coming through quite strongly, that not all data is of equal quality, followed by far-fetched claims. We all want to do a lot. So sometimes we are ambitious even when we're writing our reports. And finally, the floating metrics, so data without context. I think this was a really useful and very practical exercise, Matt. So thank you so much for taking us through that particular session. So as we move on to the next part, we are having the case study presentations, and we will be starting with David, who is on your screen. He is the co-founder of the Synergy Collaborative. So I will not read out his many great works in this space, but I think I will leave it to him to introduce himself and give context to his session. So over to you, David.
Great. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Calling in from Nairobi, Kenya, where it's quite a lovely day, as you can maybe see in my background. Where I've been here for the last 14 years, and you know, with sessions like this, I really like to give examples as a case study of like what we're doing on the ground and how we think about this. You know, how we think about this as a practitioner. This question of impact reporting. But first, let me explain a little bit about what we do, so that just to get you up to speed on that. And then from there, I'll explain the shift that we've done in that is basically at the center of tying all of our operational results to the impact reporting that we do and the impact and the subsequent funding that comes from it. And you know, and this has been a shift that we've done over the years. You know, often in response to or guided by some of the challenges that you see from that Matt was talking about, that comes with some impact reporting, which is that you know, you can really say what you want to say often, and there can be challenges that come from that. Next slide, please. So just to bring you into our world around sanitation, you know, since 250 years since the invention of flush toilet, there's still about 3.6 billion people who lack access to safe sanitation. Over 90% of waste is safely unmanaged, meaning it gets into our rivers and waterways and into our communities, causing tremendous health damages, environmental damages, and economic damages. We lose about $260 billion globally due to impaired productivity. Next slide, please. this is very true for Nairobi, where I've lived for the last 14 years. You know, the vast majority of the waste is unsafely managed, and you can see here there's very stark images around that. Next slide. But on the bright side, sanitation is one of the best investments that you could be making. You know, a whole host of the UN SDGs are achieved through providing safe sanitation. But you know, I think about this in the simplest way: is that you actually get a $5 social return on investment in increased productivity and reduced health expenditures for every dollar that goes into this. So not only when you focus on sanitation are you actually solving, you know, the immediate challenge of providing dignified sanitation, but you're actually improving people's lives considerably through that. Next slide. So that's where we exist. We're all about how do you provide safe sanitation in urban informal settlements. We work in cities throughout Kenya and Zambia, and we're providing safe sanitation. And I'll show you a little bit on how we do that. Next slide, please. So we take a circular economy approach, and what that means is it's 5 steps. We're building toilets. These are waterless toilets. We empty the waste on a daily basis. We transport that to processing centers, and then we work with our sister organization called Regen Organics to convert these into valuable agricultural inputs like organic fertilizer, insect protein, and biochar. And for all of this, you know, and so the fertilizer, for example, increases yields by 20 to 70% for farmers, increases their incomes by 40%, and we see a social return on investment of about 19x. You know, this has tremendous impact. What's more, we're actually starting now to get carbon credits for this work too, and so it's actually the first of its kind in East Africa or even Africa for sanitation-related carbon credits that have been registered by Verra. And so this actually introduces an interesting way for us to continue to be able to scale. So let me show you the model quickly in pictures. So this is the toilet. It's a Fresh Life toilet. It's bright, bold, beautiful. It's a waterless technology, so it's not dependent on sewers. And this is essential because sewer technologies, while they have been our mainstay solution, are predominantly done in wealthy areas. In low-income areas, we don't have sewers. And so, you know, developing quality, dignified services that are close to where people are living requires non-sewered approaches. Next step. And then we collect the waste on a daily basis. We have people, young people from the communities who are hired full-time getting health insurance and inoculations and PPE. We have about 300 across all of our cities doing waste collection on a daily basis. Next step. As you can see, we then take it out of the community, ensure that it gets safely removed and transported, and then final 2 steps. We're converting it into these products. So outside of Nairobi in Machakos County, for those listening there, and then also in Kakamega County, we're converting this into the products of organic fertilizer, insect protein, and briquettes. All of these products, you know, are deeply essential for increasing productivity on the agriculture side. So that's the model. Next step. And to date, here, just alone in Nairobi, we're serving just over 250,000 people already with 7,000 toilets, as well as with exhaustion centers, exhaustion centers where we're able to take on other types of waste streams too. And we are removing something like 16,000 tons of waste every year. But next step, next slide. How do we get this to be serving everybody? You know, here, here in Nairobi, you know, it's great that we're serving 250,000 people, but you know, there's actually 2.5 million people living in informal settlements here, and that's still growing, right? And so, you know, while we're solving for some of the problem, we want to be able to solve for all of this. And as we've grown, you know, we recognize that it's really important that we work with the local, with the government, with the municipality and the utilities. You know, they have tremendous influence and the mandate to be providing municipal services. And what we offer is a different way for them to be able to reach their citizens, their customers. You know, and so what we're pushing for, and I think that we'll get to transformational change for, is by partnering with the city, and so that over time this becomes just another offering that the city provides. So you know, and so basically, just like you might have a roads contract, or you might have a health contract with the city, or you know, you will also have a sanitation one. In general, we don't have this right now in most cities, and so this is something that we're really really pushing for. And so we thought, okay, well, if that's our goal, if that's how we want to do that, what can we do to make it more enticing? And this is how we built the idea of results-based financing. We basically said, okay, we're going to set up a system that will mirror exactly how government contracts work. Just to say, you know, if you know the government says we want you to serve 1 million people, you serve 1 million people, and you bid for the cost to do that. But we're working with a government yet that doesn't have the resources to be able to pay for this yet. And so what we're trying to show is that if you actually do this at scale, you will be able to bring down that cost significantly, and make it such that the government is then able to pay for it. That aligns with the budgets they currently have. Next step. Next slide, sorry. So this is a total, and so we basically have flipped the way that often it is thought about financing. You know, activity-based grant funding. You get your dollars up front, you deliver your activities, and you achieve them, and then you report on that. What we're saying is actually, no, we're going to get paid at the end of this, and so we'll get paid for there's a commitment on hand from the funders that if we achieve our impact, they will pay us for that, and that's there to be designed to mirror how government contracts work. Next step. So this works well for everybody because, you know, for us, it allows us to plan. You know, we're not raising year on year and then say, okay, if we raise $100,000, we'll be able to do this. Rather, we have those larger commitments. Right? And with that, it gives us the confidence to be able to invest in processes, systems, and scale and growth such that we actually achieve significant economies of scale. You know, you only start to achieve that once you actually have the increased numbers within the same population area, and so being able to do that more effectively is valuable. And then what funders are achieving is value for money. They basically only pay if we do what we say we're going to do, and there's greater accountability. You know, it's very clear what we have to do, and what we have to do in order to succeed. Next slide, please. And so what is it that we actually have to do? So this is what we basically tie it to 3 metrics. Basically, the number of toilets we're building, and you know, because the toilets being used. So we're not actually so we don't actually track access to, which is like a typical way of thinking about this. And then rather we actually track usage, and we know what the usage is based on the amount of waste in the toilets. It's fairly predictable. You can delve into this, but it's it's pretty predictable how much people poo per person. And so this is actually what you're able to use. And then we also measure the amount of waste being diverted from pit latrines too, right? And so we actually get paid for those results. And so having those 3 results in place, you know, they are bread and butter of what we do, right? And there's nothing, you know, and so there's nothing that is at the periphery of our work or anything like that. So that's actually makes it very aligned for us as an organization. It makes it very simple for our funders. Next slide. These emojis are quite evolved. Thank you guys. So and then I do want to show another thing that we've actually built into this. So we brought in our funders, who you can see on some of them on the left. You have some like the Canadian government, Osprey Foundation, which is Pacific Wash Foundation. They're on our board, so they review everything quarterly to make sure that we are achieving this. But then we do not want to act in isolation. The goal, as always, is still to get this to scale massively, and we know that we need the government to be the one to be involving in this. And so we formed an advisory committee that meets quarterly, that involves all of the stakeholders. And this is just, this is a snapshot of Kenya. This is all the people we have to deal with too, on a regular basis, to be able to operate. And I guess it's not that surprising for a municipal service either, right? Is that you have folks in the national and the county level, you have regulators, and you have you have people from both health and water and sanitation, and you have the utility. And so it's been, and so we bring this group together, and it's been really remarkable, actually, just anecdotally, like how much more engaged they are as a result of this. There's a, obviously there's excitement about what our progress is, but there's also new ideas coming through and credible co-financing opportunities for us to be able to fund, to be able to raise further funds for this too. And so that's worked really well. Next up. So, so that's where we are. And basically, right now, you can see that we're basically looking to raise money for this, which is, this is not a pitch, but I'm trying to show you that it actually changes our funding structure as an organization as we grow. You can see the budget stays roughly the same, but then the impact that we're able to have is scaling significantly. And we expect to go from 250,000 to about 1 million people over these next 5 years. So next slide. I think that's it. Yes, it is. Great. So that's so happy to share our story there, and happy to take questions later on.
Thank you so much, David. This was really comprehensive, and you can see the emojis flying up the screen. It is an area that I think resonates with a lot of those folks who are on the call from African countries. This is a prevalent issue across any city that you may be in around the continent. So how do you bring in governments? How do you engage around results? And how can you prove your impact in a way that also brings a long-term sustainable funding for your venture? So this has kind of given, I think, lots of points for reflection for those who are thinking. And so my quote from David, because I'm going to get a quote from everybody who speaks today, is sometimes you can just say what you want to say, but you have to be credible, right? And David has actually proved that even with something that's quite amorphous, right? Like how many times is a toilet used? If that is quite the metric, right? But if you're able to prove that, then you're able to then create a real line of impact that is visible and verifiable. So thank you, David, so much for sharing that with us. And we'll be giving time in the Q&A slot for questions, but you can also be putting them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, where David can also be responding in real time as he's listening as well. So over to speaker 2. Abdullahi, over to you.
Thank you, Nasri. Oh, I think we have a poll right here.
Sorry, I needed to say that there's a poll. Sorry, guys. So we do have a short poll. It's on your screen. When do you think proxy indicators are appropriate in impact reporting? So just a couple of seconds for you to just put in your feedback. please display the results, please?
Mute. Nasri, you're mute.
Sorry about that. So the first one is only as temporary measures until better data is available. So it's a recognition that sometimes the lack of data is what forces us into these situations, followed by sometimes the outcome takes very long to materialize. And then when direct measurement is too costly or complex. And then there is a percentile, 5%, who say never. They dilute credibility of your report. So this is all very interesting. So thank you all for sharing. And as that closes, please, Abdullah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nasri. And really exciting conversations. I mean, what's a conversation around communicating impact without some real-time data collection? So perhaps we can just dive right into it. Next slide, please. So my name is Abdullahi. I have the privilege of working with Leap Africa as a senior MERAL coordinator. And it means that myself and my team have been given the privilege and responsibility to put our best foot forward in ensuring that the work that we do and the work that we support our ecosystem partners in doing are well measured and well reported, put it simple in that way. So I'm going to use and share Leap Africa as a case study in this conversation. So you can kindly move on to the next slide, please. But you'll find that during the conversation, we'll speak about what Leap Africa does, how we see impact and how we aim to communicate and measure it. You'll also see how we divide our approach into different structures and systems, depending on what kind of issue we're trying to tackle, and also who we're trying to communicate the impact to. So looking forward to your feedback as well, and just conversing around some of those ideas. So Leap Africa, I've seen some of our partners and members in on the chat. So it's a Pan-African 23-year-old youth leadership development organization. As some of you might be aware, we have 5 thematic areas, which we fondly call 3E's AH. As you can see, the first E over there is education, followed by entrepreneurship, there's employability, active citizenship as well, and health and well-being. Our vision is to have an inclusive and thriving Africa, built through dynamic, innovative, and ethical youth leaders. So, we're having conversations around data and ethical considerations come right into it. We have the mission to inspire and empower African youth by developing capacity and providing resources for transformative personal, organizational, and community leadership. So some of these capacity building opportunities that we offer, you find them around the impact reporting lens, the monitoring, evaluation, and learning components as well, but you'll find more about that as we move on. Kindly move on to the next slide, Sharon. So right here, you'll find some of our numbers, but maybe I'm not going to stay long on the slide. You can see some of these numbers on leapafrica.org. But you might find some insights into impact communications on this slide. So you see we're communicating different things. We're communicating our direct beneficiaries, indirect beneficiaries as well. We're also communicating where we have touched foot and where we have delivered interventions over 48 African countries. You're also seeing some sectoral division around our numbers in terms of what we reached in 2024, the kind of programs. And you also see we also capture figures around webinar attendees and viewers because we see it as part of the way that you communicate the value you contribute to, and which is not wholly attributed to you when it comes to knowledge dissemination and conversations around some of these emerging and topical issues. Kindly move on to the next slide. All right. So as a Pan-African organization, it means that what we do and where we do it is quite complex. You find us in different contexts and different realities. So it means that as we evolved over the past 23 years, we have devised 2 approaches. with which we measure and communicate impact. So the first one, as you can see on the left, is internal and systemic. Is quite also operational. So when it comes to Leap Africa as an organization, we have an organizational theory of change. You also have results chain and frameworks with which we measure our own progress as an organization. And that is separate from the pathways and the programs and other interventions that we run. As you can see, some the Social Innovators Program, Youth Day of Service, the Nigerian Youth Futures Fund, some of which are sub-granting programs, some of which are training, some mentorship, and some are just so complex with so much diverse offerings. And then when you look at the ecosystem approach, we try to serve the ecosystem because we know that if you play in an environment where you try to fortify yourself, but you don't fortify others, or aim to also get contributions to be fortified, it becomes inefficient. So we have the, as you can see, the MERAL unit and also other systems that work within Leap Africa. Have a Leap MERAL advisory, and this advisory has another component, which is the community of practice, because also we believe we can't work in silo. And we are happy that the community of practice members are happy to have Leap Africa within it as well. And then we have webinar convenience and just conversations around some of these knowledge products that we're putting out in the ecosystem. And we're going to talk about some of them as we move on to the next slide. So yes, when you think about it, it means that we target the problems because they're wicked problems and they're also polycrisis kind of problems. We target them in different ways. So when it comes to impact measurement and impact reporting, I think I won't stay here for a lot of time because Matt and David have spoken quite much to inputs, activities, outputs, and all of that. But maybe what we want to communicate here is that right when you start considering your avenue to measurement is the same time that you begin to think about how you're going to report and communicate effectively. So it means that when you're considering the design of your intervention, you're already collaborating and having conversation with different stakeholders. It could be, as Matt mentioned, the end user, it could be the beneficiary, it could be the donor, it could be the pool of community that you work with as well. So you work hand in hand with them when you're having the inception conversations and activities, the data collection, the reporting as well, be it impact evaluations, be it impact reports, be them value for money evaluations, as we've seen in the Q&A while we're responding to some of them, and just having different formats of presenting as well, which we're going to learn more as we move on to the next slide. So when you think about Leap Africa, we're going to use Leap Africa now as a case. Kindly move on to the next slide. Right here, we present to you our theory of change. You do have programmatic theories of change, intervention-based theories of change, but you also have structural and organizational and systemic level theories of change. And this is a sub-case under Leap Africa as a case itself. So we believe that if young people and the systems that support them across Africa are equipped and empowered with transformative leadership skills, access to resources, and strengthened networks to foster collaboration, that's an ecosystem building component, as you see right there. And then thought leadership also as well is infused into the if statement. And then our third strategic approach item is also infused into the if statements, which is advocacy. It leads us to where we intend to be and where we want to be based on our vision and mission, that an inclusive and thriving Africa, driven by dynamic, innovative, and ethical youth leaders will emerge. So it means that already you're seeing these as some kind of pseudo pathway. It's a model, but this is just a sub-case. So as we move on to the next slide, kindly, you'll find that we break them into different sub-components of pathways based on the ecosystem building approach, the thought leadership approach, and the advocacy approach. So this slide speaks to, I think it will really be great if you can listen to the recording again. You can maybe just take a look at the screen, infuse it, and digest it. But you really see the breakdowns around the diverse KPIs that we use to measure its strategic objective, and also the outputs and outcomes that we intend to realize. Kindly move on to the next slide. So the next represents thought leadership. It's quite similar in terms of design. And then you move on to the next slide, which speaks about advocacy. And then here we can move on. So when you come to, this is another sub case, number 2. So when it comes to impact reporting, there's really a need to address the diverse narratives and diverse needs that your listeners and your readers and your stakeholders are going to be interested in. So for example, for us at Leap Africa, as part of our efforts on entrepreneurship, we have social entrepreneurship programs. And then for a decade, Leap Africa has proven and championed the transformative power of social entrepreneurship across the continent. And that is really through our flagship program, which is the Social Innovators Program, which is also still happening this year. We have seen value in using these 3 approaches: cases and stories, research and pieces. They can be articles, they can be opinion ads, and they can really be in diverse forms. And then there are also reports and dashboards that you can utilize. So when it comes to cases, you find that there's so much value in having narratives and compelling cases, especially as they have been proven and tested and proven and revised, and sometimes even with so much iterations and the approach to which it is reviewed, especially at an ecosystem level. And then you put them out to communicate after you have come in, what has changed, why has it changed, under what circumstance did the change happen, and who contributed to that change. As my co-panelists and speakers have said, there's really so much to pay attention to, not to over-communicate or maybe go beyond where you have contributed to, because there's nothing like attribution in this part of the work that we do. There's nothing that is attributed to one single person. There's always something happening somewhere. And there are also other lived experiences. So you also conduct research, and you also put out different kind of reports, be them evaluation reports, be them technical working reports, be them policy reports, and then you have all that communicated as well. So we can move on to the next slide to see how Leap Africa has attempted, or let me say, proven the use of these approaches. So the social entrepreneurship program efforts have been able to communicate impact through these diverse avenues. The good thing is that you can see it on our website at leapafrica.org, but you can see you can see the stories of change throughout it as well, because you know that there are different audiences that need different kind of evidence. So we have research that we conducted at the 5-year mark, which speaks about resilience to transilience. And then at the 10-year mark, which was just last year, we conducted another research with some of our colleagues in the ecosystem around the state of social entrepreneurship in Africa. And that is an evidence base for us to reflect on what has happened in the past 10 years, not only with SIP or SCP programs, but with what's happening in the ecosystem as well. And then it's an opportunity for others to do so and utilize it for their respective uses. And then we have evaluation reports and articles as well. There's one that should come out this month. So you can just look out on our website, leapafrica.org, and you'll see some of that. So kindly move on to the next slide. So we really do believe that the journey to impact communications and reporting ends at the beginning and begins at the end. But why do we put it that way? It's because if you start it out well and include the relevant partners, it means you're likely going to end well. But if you don't start the right way, you know, it's exclusive. There's no inclusive process to check in on what kind of information is relevant to these stakeholders, be them public, private, or nonprofit, be them investors, be them ESOs, enterprise support organizations. It will really be hard for you to find ways to force yourself to communicate it to them. So you listen to them right from the beginning. So you have initial consultations, and that's where you try to clarify. It enables you to further clarify your objectives and what their expectations are likely going to be as well, and also any gaps that are likely to evolve or emerge. Because you find that sometimes when you're trying to get data that you need to communicate some of this impact that you're trying to put out there, as has been mentioned by some of my colleagues here on the call, you can report with inaccurate data, you can report with incomplete data, And sometimes you really just report in a context that doesn't fit them. So it's really important to have that consultation. You also want to ensure that, well, we have those conversations around secondary data. You always see it in proposals and methodologies. But the interesting thing is that the depth of available reports, knowledge base, and evidence is really, really so much, but a lot of us are not even aware of them. So there's so much that we can do. We can dedicate more time to really seeing the intersectionality and the relationships and really connecting them through literature reviews and other forms of reviews as well. There's the feedback component as well, has been discussed to a great extent, and then stakeholder engagement. I think we can move on to the next slide. All right. So for us, over the past score and a couple of years, we have seen value in having frameworks that work and could be adapted in different contexts, and they've also been tested by different entities. But we are very much aware that all reporting should be transparent for whether be them African stakeholders, but I think that's one of our primary field of play anyways. We should also consider the extent to which our evidence is locally rooted and then globally informed. Because while you're working in your own context, you're also affected by diverse items that come up, events, changes in the donor landscape, changes in the recipient landscape as well. All of that affects you. So you also think about effective decision making when it comes to who is going to listen or read your evidence or understand your evidence or make sense of it and apply it in their context. There's also accountability to communities, to donors, to your beneficiaries, to the gatekeepers and to policymakers and all the continent's development goals, which is very important to us. And then for advocacy, we see that for policy changes and increased investment in youth development across Africa, there's so much relevance and importance that needs to be placed on the approach to reporting, the approach to measurement, and the approach to applications. Some of the models, or let me say frameworks, we'll get to models in a bit. Frameworks that we have used and has proven to work for us, be it as an organization or as different entities, logic models, theories of change, the DEI lens, mixed methods approach, and other common tools and frameworks. But from the comments and questions that I've responded to, I think these are things that we are conversant with. So move on to the next slide, please. Another case, I think this is the last slide, is how Leap Africa models and also takes a systems lens approach. So when you think about modeling, you think about it in a very simple way. It's really taking out something that, in this context anyways, taking out something that you have done, something that has been tested, something that has been reviewed, be it a way of delivering an intervention, a way of granting, a way of taking money, a way of giving out money or sub-granting it, or a way of even reporting what you're doing. So you think of it as simplifying that, usually in a visual way, which is an effective way to also communicate beyond all the array of words that we use, and also organizing them in a systemic and organized framework. So why model? So we see models as a way to distill complex initiatives into manageable parts. It also makes it easy for anyone that is looking at your model. For example, it could be the SCP or SIP interventions by Leap Africa, as a way to truly understand how the change happens, in what circumstance it happens, and then why they should contribute to getting that change to keep happening, perhaps at a bigger scale. So some of those can be illustrated through the theories of change and logical framework. It's also important to model because it's a clear map of your activities, which enables you to prioritize the resources and the design of your systems. And it's also very good in making that swift change or adapting when you're putting in delivering your intervention or making those engagements to get the money in the bag or put the money in the field. So some of those you find them in communications for impact using the IDA model, which is simply just finding ways to understand what leads to attention, what leads to interest, what leads to the desire, and what could lead them to the action. And that's very, very important now in the impact communication landscape, because there's just so much information out there. Everyone is trying to communicate what they're doing, but it's up to you to put your best foot forward. Models are also a robust way to test what works in a setting and what doesn't work in a different setting. And then we can move on to systems lens. So when you think about systems, you can pretty much just think about it as why what you're doing leads to the change, but not just as a result of what you do, but what other factors are at play. Who contributes, who asks questions, who should do something at the initial stage, at the data collection stage, at the implementation stage, at the reporting stage. Everyone has a role to play. So this is what we do as a Pan-African organization at Leap Africa. And we invite you to, connect with us. We have a community of practice on leapafrica.org. Thank you. Back to you, Nasri.
Thank you, Abdullahi. I see a number of your team members on the call, and I think they should be exceptionally proud. That was excellent. Thank you very much for taking us through that. So your quote is ends at the beginning and begins at the end. So a true reflection of who are you reporting to? Why do you want to report? Are you thinking about this from a systems lens? Are you thinking about this as an ecosystem player? And the two case studies that we offered today were really trying to give very different variations of sort of approach, but at the end of the day, very similar considerations on a baseline. So thank you very much, Abdullahi, for sharing. I would encourage you all to look at the different sites. We are going to be sharing information on a follow-up email, so don't worry if you didn't catch all the information. There is a recording of all of this that will be shared with you afterwards. I'd like us to launch into a quick poll to wrap up this session. How confident are you in distinguishing between outputs, outcomes, and impact? It's on your screen. How confident are you in distinguishing between outputs, outcomes, and impact? A few seconds for your responses before we launch into our Q&A. All right, could you please display the results on the screen for us? Right, so very confident. Okay, so it starts with somewhat confident into very confident, and then an 8th percentile of not confident. Well, we hope after this session that some of you in that 8th percentile will increase and move up to the next level of being somewhat confident. And by the time we end the series in a couple of months, you will be feeling very confident. That's the goal of these sessions. So I'd like to hand over to Sam Mutisia, who's our program manager at AVPA, to take us through the Q&A session. Thanks. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Nasri. Thank you, David. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Abdullahi. I just wanted to give us this opportunity to just go over the question, the answer session. And I just want to start off with Fred Gania, who has his hand up. So if you can be able to just unmute, and then from there you pose a question to any of the speakers. And as you do that, we'll also be picking on the questions on the question and answer, as well as the questions that were submitted earlier. But Fred, the floor is yours. You can go first.
Thank you very much, Samuel. I think that was in error. I just put the hand up in error. Sorry.
Okay, not to worry. I just want to pick a question that came through from the audience, and I'll start off with you, David. I think there was a lot of interest in terms of how did you move from being foundation funded to actually proving the impact, measurement of the impact and getting the carbon credits. I think that would be very interesting to the audience, because where we are sitting as AVPA, we are very keen to unlock the catalytic capital within the Pan-African space. So David, we can pick that up as I pick others as well.
Sorry, Samuel. So the question was, sorry, transitioning the types of funding. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes, from foundation to now getting paid for carbon credit.
Yeah, I mean, so carbon credits directly was accomplished was through putting was actually going through the process and actually using some grant capital to be able to start to apply for it, because it's actually a very long, drawn out process with lots of consultants and things like this. And so that was a strategic choice that we made. On the transitioning to government funding, I mean, this is the journey we're on, and we're trying to get, we're getting the governments to pay more and more, but and really framing it as replacing the philanthropic capital.
Thank you for that. Matt, I just want to quickly pick a question that was put through from the audience, and it was mainly around measuring the indirect beneficiaries. That's number one. And then number two was around measuring the social return on investment. If you can just take the two, and I know also Abdullah would be willing to also speak to measuring on indirect beneficiaries.
Yeah, happy to. And such great questions coming in. Please do keep them coming. It shows such great attention to the detail on impact performance reporting. Yes, I'm sure my fellow panelists as well have some views on both direct and indirect beneficiaries. I'd probably like to say that we see the journey to impact performance reporting as a community and a collective. And there's many of these topics where there are no clear guidance and methodologies that exist, but actually can emerge through peer learning and sharing of different approaches. And I think a lot of interest recently around things like how to move from beyond counting directly affected communities and individuals to wider value chain, supply chain impacts, but also to systems change. How are we trying, or how are our interventions addressing these bigger topics like inequality that you can't really measure on an individual level? So we're just to call out as well to say we have a number of work streams ongoing at Impact Frontiers, and we'd be keen to dig into more around understanding systems level outcomes. And I think that's something, if anyone has any experiences on that or views, we'd love to hear from you, and please do share them. A related point on that, Sam, if I may, is on, I think whatever approach is taken, and here your question is very specifically, and the question is very specifically around monetization. There are many different ways to assess impact, and there are very different ways to value or place a relative value on those impacts. It can end with putting a monetary figure, a naira, a kwacha, a dollar, whatever value on it. There's no right, there's no wrong. For those who are doing monetization, the IFVI and others have got some really good resources. I think the key is to make sure, linking back to an earlier question, like, are we really valuing what matters, right? And how are ultimately affected and the needs of affected and interested communities and individuals taken into account in those decisions about what good impact looks like? And I think there was a great question around how do you actually engage stakeholders in the processes of assessing, reporting on, and communicating impact performance. And I think that's another super interesting question, because the temptation is to always do that from a top-down point of view, so to speak, rather than actually listening to and engaging people and planet who are being affected. So that's another one I'd just like to put a shout out for a future session. It's topic 3 in this reporting series, where we'll really double click on that and do a deep dive. But just to say, that is the glue, I think, that holds all of these questions together. Whatever approach you've taken, whether you're looking at direct or indirect, how do you actually value what matters in terms of engaging the people and planet in making and having an input into those decisions about impact performance? So I'd love any examples as well from that, if the audience has any.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matt. I really know it's a question around attribution versus contribution for those in the M&E field, and I think those perspectives are really interesting. So Abdullah, I know you also responded to that, and just to bring on board your perspectives, especially around the indirect beneficiaries. and what
Yeah.
Matt has just mentioned around engaging the stakeholders to get their inputs.
Yes, as Matt has put it, in a lot of ways, you really truly first think about what matters. And then before you even move on to thinking about how to report direct and indirect beneficiaries, because in a lot of ways, there are just so many approaches to report the beneficiaries. You also think about the kind of interventions that you're driving. So for example, since I'm here to present Leap Africa as a case, at Leap Africa, we have different kind of interventions. So we have interventions that have some sub-granting components to them. Of course, there are other factors and other support involved. But it means that, we're equipping organizations and not individuals alone. So it means that it will differ from those two contexts. So it means that there are times that we measure direct and indirect beneficiaries from a standpoint of, number one, the multiplier effect. The beneficiary multiplied by a certain number. There are usually 3 or 2 ways that are very common, very popular and accepted. There's the average family size, and then there's the highest number of engagements when you attended a webinar, or when they organized an advocacy campaign and all of that. And then there's the second one, which usually applies to when you are supporting organizations and not individuals directly. And that is the self-reporting guide that we offer to beneficiaries themselves. So for example, on the Youth Day of Service program, on the NY Nigerian Youth Futures Front program, as well, and also on the Social Innovators program, we use that approach because you find that these startups, organizations, and groups go on to support and offer a diverse set of support, let me still use that word, to different individuals, different entities, and different organizations. So they report the numbers in that regard. We have templates and guides that we share with them. I think I'll also share a publication either by Oxfam. It's a standardization guide on beneficiary reporting, but it really, in a lot of ways, ties to what really matters when you're reporting, who is listening to those numbers. What will they be interested in listening to, and then what are the stories behind those numbers? They should always accompany those numbers. That's a rule for us here. And then also the second is that you consider your type of intervention, the type of intervention you're running. So you can't apply maybe the beneficiary reporting approach when they are not reporting any beneficiary or any ripple effect to you at a later time. At that point, you also start considering the scope or time it takes for you to deliver in the intervention, and then whether you're going to go back to that community or not. So there's quite a number of considerations, but I think I'll be sure to put it on the chat before the session rounds up. That robust guide around beneficiary reporting, just to be more comprehensive. Hope that works.
Thank you so much, Abdullahi. I think we are really sharing some of the resources that you can be able to utilize in the chat. And now I want to just hand over to my colleague Nasri for the wind down session. But just note that whatever Matt shared is open source. So it's also available on the link on the chat and also subsequently during the time that we'll be sharing the webinar recording. So over to you, Nasri.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for the interaction in the Q&A, as well as for questions that were coming through as we were speaking. We hope today's session has helped deepen your understanding on how you move beyond activity-based reporting towards performance-based, decision-useful insights that tell a clearer story of your impact in your respective organizations. And as we heard, the shift towards stronger, more consistent impact reporting isn't just a technical adjustment, it's a strategic one, right? It helps build credibility with your stakeholders. So as David exemplified, it helps you shift from traditional grant models into even, working with policymakers. It helps you drive more informed capital allocation. And most importantly, it ensures that the impact we intend to create, as Abdullahi exemplified, is actually measured, understood by not just those who you are offering the report to, but even those you're working with, and that process can be improved upon. And so if we can go to the next slide, just to say that the next session takes place on August 7th. It's what to do when things go wrong. So that one, hope it'll be one that you will also look forward to being a part of. We have shared the impact reporting template in the chat. As mentioned, it is open resource, so feel free to click on the link, and we'll also be sharing it in the follow-up email to come. And we can go to the last slide, please. So there's a quick survey because we want to know whether we thought it went well or it actually went well, right? You see, we're taking on board the lessons already. So we'd like to get some data from all of you. Please, I know sometimes these surveys are not the most fun, but if you could just take a quick scan of that web on the page in front of you and fill in those questions, we would really, really appreciate that. Final one. Final slide, please. Right, and so this is an invitation to our conference happening in Nairobi from the 3rd to the 5th of November, so a few months away. And we are actually having a call out for ventures because we do have a segment that we call Impact in Action, where we want to be able to showcase interesting work, organizations coming up with interesting models, focusing on tech for good, jobs for the future, and gender smart investing. So we will also share this in the email that will come to you. So don't worry if you don't get all the information. And it's also been shared quickly in the chat as well by Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. So it's also an opportunity to engage with you in a different way coming into November. We also have our tickets open at the moment and also open to sponsors if that is something that would be of interest to you. So thank you very much to our panelists. Matt, thank you very much. David, Abdullahi, Sam, and the entire organizing AVPA team. It's not just us, there's like lots of people in the background making magic happen. And we look forward to hosting you again in a month's time. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.